Welcome to the debate. Today we're diving headfirst into one of those really profound questions that has captivated thinkers for millennia, the very existence of a deity. And we're not just touching the surface here, we're really wrestling with the intellectually rigorous arguments that underpin our understanding of the universe's origin and fundamental structure, really pushing the boundaries of, well, what reason can tell us.
Indeed. And our specific question for today is whether the physical and logical realities governing the universe's origin and structure truly necessitate a transcendent cause, or if naturalistic explanations are ultimately sufficient. And critically, in all of this, what are the inherent limits of our knowledge on such profound matters? This discussion emerges directly from our in-depth study of three core philosophical stances: hard theism, metaphysical naturalism, and strong agnosticism.
Right. I'll be presenting arguments primarily from the perspective of hard theism, which posits a single, supreme, transcendent, and personal being whose existence, I believe, can be demonstrably established through natural reason alone.
And I, in turn, will be advocating for metaphysical naturalism, asserting that, well, no gods exist and that all phenomena are ultimately explainable by natural forces, challenging the very need to introduce a supernatural entity into our understanding of reality.
And throughout our discussion, we'll also be engaging with the strong agnostic position. This perspective holds that the existence or non-existence of a deity is fundamentally unknowable to human reason, and we'll be using its insights as a critical lens, really, to examine our respective arguments.
So yeah, we're setting the stage for a deeply philosophical exploration of the cosmos itself, and how these different frameworks attempt to make sense of its ultimate origins.
Okay, so to begin our exploration, let's consider the intellectual foundations that I think strongly point towards a transcendent creator. We can start with the Kalam cosmological argument, a position refined by contemporary philosophers. It's often presented in a clear, compelling syllogistic form. First, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Second, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Okay, now let's unpack these premises a bit. The first one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. This is presented as an inductive truth, widely affirmed by observation within our universe. Everywhere we look, from the simplest physical interaction to the most complex biological processes, effects follow causes. Nothing just, springs into being from nothing without an antecedent cause. This isn't just a convenient assumption. It's a bedrock principle of our experience of reality.
Right, within our experience.
Exactly. Now, our second premise, the universe began to exist. Well, this is supported by a profound philosophical concept, the impossibility of an actual infinite series of past events. This distinction between a potential infinite, like, say, an unending sequence of numbers, or the indefinite divisibility of a line segment where you can always add one more or divide further, and an actual infinite, a completed totality, a collection with an endless number of members that has somehow been finished or traversed, this distinction is absolutely crucial here. An actual infinite cannot, by its very nature, exist in reality, especially not in a temporal sequence of events. Think of it this way. If the universe were infinitely old, an actually infinite number of past moments would have had to elapse to reach the present moment. But how can you complete an infinite series? You just can't. If you imagine, say, two planets rotating at different constant rates in an infinitely old universe, both would have completed an actually infinite number of rotations, yet one would have completed more infinite rotations than the other, which is, well, a logical absurdity if both are truly infinite. This kind of thought experiment demonstrates that a completed infinite past is impossible. Therefore, the universe cannot be infinitely old. It must have had a beginning. And if the universe began to exist, then, by our first premise, it must have a cause. Now, this cause cannot itself be caused, because then we'd have an infinite regress, which we've just argued is impossible. This necessitates an uncaused cause, a non-contingent, necessary being that cannot not exist.
It isn't dependent on anything else. It exists by its very nature, a sort of fundamental anchor in reality, unlike everything else we observe that could have been otherwise. The universe, in this view, is a contingent being. It depends on something else for its existence. But it's not just the beginning of the universe that implies this. When we look at the very structure of reality, the laws governing it, we see an equally compelling pointer towards intelligence, what we often call the fine-tuning argument. Cosmological constants and physical laws appear just exquisitely fine-tuned for life. Had they differed only very, very slightly, the universe wouldn't contain stars or galaxies, let alone complex conscious creatures like us.
For instance, consider the strength of gravity. If it were weaker by just 1 part in 1060, I mean, to put that in perspective, that's like adjusting the diameter of the entire observable universe by the width of a single atom. It would have prevented the formation of galaxies and stars entirely. No stars, no planets, no life.
Similarly, the cosmological constant which governs the universe's expansion is so precise that a deviation of just 1 part in 1053 would have caused the universe to either collapse immediately or expand way too rapidly for any structure to form. It's a precision that genuinely beggars belief.
It is quite remarkable.
Yeah, right? So, the firing squad analogy illustrates this powerfully. Imagine you're facing a firing squad of 50 expert marksmen, all aiming at you from close range. They all fire, and somehow every single shot misses. Would you just shrug it off as incredible luck? No, your rational mind would immediately conclude there was some deliberate intention for them to miss, a deliberate choice, maybe a setup. The extraordinary improbability demands an explanation beyond mere coincidence. Similarly, the fine-tuned universe, it just cries out for explanation. And the most intellectually satisfying hypothesis, I argue, is that of a deliberate, rational mind behind it all, a designer.
I appreciate the sophistication and the detailed presentation of those arguments. They are certainly compelling for many people. However, I must challenge their underlying assumptions and conclusions from a naturalistic viewpoint, offering, well, a different way to frame these ultimate questions. Regarding the Kalam cosmological argument, the premise that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Yes, it's an inductive claim, and it holds true for observations within our universe. But applying this principle to the universe as a whole, to the totality of existence, is, in my view, an unwarranted extrapolation. We're dealing with something utterly unique, the entire universe itself, and it's not necessarily bound by the same causal chains that govern its internal phenomena. The universe itself could, in fact, be the uncaused exception, a unique event that fundamentally doesn't conform to the rules we observe within it. We're talking about the ultimate origin here.
To infer a cause for the universe based on what happens inside the universe seems like potentially a category error, applying a localized rule universally. Furthermore, the concept of a necessary being, well, it often feels like a bit of a logical sleight of hand. It's an attempt to define something into existence by stating it cannot not exist. But this isn't really a meaningful statement about reality that can be empirically verified or even philosophically justified as distinct from the universe itself. What precisely makes this specific being necessary in a way the universe itself couldn't be? It seems to arbitrarily halt the chain of inquiry at a point convenient for theistic claims. As Bertrand Russell famously put it, the universe is just there and that's all. The search for a first cause might simply be an unnecessary metaphysical question if the universe itself can be posited as the ultimate fact, requiring no external explanation.
Now, concerning the fine-tuning argument, yes, it is indeed striking, but it's compelling only if one presupposes a, let's say, limited set of possibilities for how a universe might form. The multiverse hypothesis, I believe, offers a far more elegant and arguably more parsimonious explanation without resorting to supernatural design. The core idea is pretty simple. If there exists a vast, maybe even infinite number of universes, each with randomly varying physical laws and initial conditions, that it becomes statistically inevitable that at least one of these universes would end up with the precise conditions necessary for life to emerge.
Inevitable.
Well, statistically speaking, yes. And by definition, we could only find ourselves in such a life-permitting universe. This is the observer selection effect, or the weak anthropic principle, at play. It simply states that our existence constrains the kind of universe we can observe. We shouldn't be surprised to find ourselves in a life-permitting universe, because if it weren't, well, we wouldn't be here to observe it. The firing squad analogy, while vivid, I think it's flawed when applied here because it assumes a single isolated event with a presumed intention. A more apt analogy might be a lottery with an infinite number of tickets being drawn, each with different numbers. It's not just that some ticket would win, it's an absolute certainty that a winning ticket will be drawn, and we would, of course, be the ones holding that winning ticket if we're here to talk about it. We wouldn't then infer a designer for the lottery just because our specific ticket won.
Moreover, the design hypothesis, doesn't it just push the explanatory problem up a level? If a complex, intelligent designer is required to explain the universe, then what in turn explains the designer? This seems to lead to an infinite regress of designers, or it posits an even more complex entity without offering any ultimate explanation for its own existence. Resorting to the supernatural often becomes a kind of God of the gaps argument, a placeholder for current scientific ignorance that historically tends to recede as our understanding of natural phenomena grows. A central tenet of scientific naturalism is to rigorously look for explanations within the natural order, not outside it. Arguments from fine-tuning in this context can sometimes fall into what's been termed the fallacy of pattern seeking, where we infer design where none objectively exists simply because patterns are comforting and intuitively appealing. Naturalism, as a positive and coherent worldview, provides a framework for understanding all observable phenomena without resorting to, unprovable supernatural claims.
I see why you think that, and I understand the intuitive appeal of an infinite lottery. But let me push back a bit. Even with the multiverse hypothesis, you're still left with an extraordinary statistical improbability that our specific universe, with its incredibly precise constants, would arise just by chance without some underlying mechanism or, dare I say, intelligence guiding the process. It's not merely some ticket winning, it's the exact, incredibly specific winning combination, one that allows for stars and galaxies and life, in a lottery that frankly feels almost rigged to produce winners. And the conceptual difficulties of an uncaused universe, particularly one emerging from nothing without any prior cause, they still linger. The logical impossibility of an actual infinite series of past events isn't merely an inductive claim within our universe, it feels more like a philosophical truth about the very nature of completed infinities in time.
You ever actually reach now? This implies the universe, even if it's somehow an uncaused exception, fundamentally must have had a beginning, requiring an explanation for that beginning. To simply say the universe is just there doesn't actually address the profound philosophical question of its ultimate initiation, especially if an infinite regress is off the table.
I understand the intuitive force of that argument, advocate, especially the struggle with infinite regress. But I'd suggest again we might be applying a rule from within our universe too broadly. While I acknowledge the profound challenge of the actual infinite to any purely naturalistic eternal universe model, I'm not fully convinced by that line of reasoning, precisely because applying inductive principles derived from observations within a system to the totality of that system itself is, fundamentally problematic. The universe in its entirety could simply be the brute fact, the ultimate given, which requires no further explanation. Isn't it a simpler explanation to say the universe is just there than to posit an even more complex, uncaused God who then mysteriously requires no explanation? And where do you draw the line between a philosophical impossibility and simply a concept our human minds, struggle to fully grasp? The concept of a necessary being often feels like a definitional escape hatch rather than a substantive answer. You define something as existing necessarily, but that doesn't actually demonstrate its existence, nor does it really resolve the question of why that specific entity gets to be the necessary one. It just gives it a name.
And this brings us to a crucial point, doesn't it? It's precisely where the strong agnostic's critique on the limits of human reason becomes particularly insightful and frankly challenging for both of our positions. Our reason truly does struggle with concepts like before the Big Bang or the true nature of an actual infinite. David Hume's argument, for instance, suggests that our understanding of cause and effect is fundamentally based on habits of thinking, on observed constant conjunctions, not necessarily on a direct apprehension of external causal forces themselves.
Right.
So misapplying this habit to the ultimate origin of everything, to the very beginning of existence, could be an unsupported philosophical extension, However, I have to question whether dismissing a transcendent cause based solely on current empirical limits is itself an epistemological overreach. Is it not more rational, even within these acknowledged limits, to interpret the inherent design we observe, like in the fine-tuning, as genuine evidence for a deliberate mind, even if the designer's full nature is beyond our complete grasp? It sometimes feels like we are almost defining away the possibility of a transcendent cause by arbitrarily limiting our explanatory toolkit only to what we can empirically verify within the universe itself. If our universe began, and it's fine-tuned, and an actual infinite past is logically impossible, isn't a transcendent, uncaused cause the most coherent explanation available, even if we can't fully grasp its metaphysical essence?
That's fair, and I agree. The agnostic highlights significant limits, for very good reason. My argument, while naturalistic, does have to acknowledge that the multiverse hypothesis, for example, is a speculative claim about things outside our observable universe. It posits this vast ensemble of universes, which isn't exactly a direct scientific observation in itself. The agnostic rightly points out that this could become an unrestricted model where basically anything logically possible becomes 100% probable somewhere, potentially, as some critics say, spelling the end of scientific investigation by explaining away any improbable event through sheer statistical chance across countless possibilities. It risks becoming an unfalsifiable postulate. But if our reason truly cannot grasp these ultimate origins, then doesn't that also fundamentally challenge your claim of a demonstrably true transcendent cause? You also posit an ultimate fact, a God, which, by agnostic lights, might be equally beyond empirical verification regarding its ultimate origin or nature. How can you claim demonstrability if human reason is potentially so limited in this specific realm?
That's a very powerful point from the agnostic perspective, and one I certainly grapple with. But I would argue that demonstratability through natural reason is perhaps distinct from empirical verification. While we cannot empirically observe the first cause, the logical necessity that seems to arise from the universe's beginning and its finely tuned parameters strongly points to it as a rational inference. The agnostic helps us appreciate the humility required, absolutely, but it does not, in my view, negate the rational conclusion drawn from the evidence we do have. My claim is about a logically necessary conclusion based on observable premises, not a direct, empirical observation of a deity.
And here's where the tension remains, I suppose. While the agnostic challenges my certainty about something like the multiverse, my claim isn't necessarily one of ultimate knowledge, but maybe more of a methodological preference. That the direction of our inquiry should exhaust naturalistic explanations before we posit something inherently untestable and outside our empirical framework altogether. The agnostic challenges my certainty, perhaps, but not necessarily my approach to seeking answers within nature first. The multiverse, however speculative, at least remains within the realm of physical possibility and scientific modeling, even if currently beyond direct observation, unlike, arguably, a transcendent non-physical being. It tries to explain phenomena by positing more phenomena, rather than introducing a fundamentally different category of existence.
And this is where the agnostic truly challenges both of us, isn't it, fundamentally? They observe that both the theist and the atheist, in their certainty, make gnostic claims to knowledge, about what is fundamentally beyond empirical verification. Whether it's a necessary creator or an uncaused universe or multiverse, aren't we both asserting a level of knowledge that perhaps human reason, as thinkers like Hume and Kant suggested, is simply not equipped to fully grasp? This challenge should make us both reflect on the certainty we sometimes project, pushing us to distinguish carefully between what we can know, what we can rationally infer, and what might always remain fundamentally beyond our conceptual grasp, for both theist and naturalist alike. It's really a call for intellectual humility in the face of these ultimate questions.
Absolutely. The agnostic's point is profound. Both of our positions, certainly in their most definitive forms, venture into territory where empirical verification is currently impossible, and perhaps eternally so, While I argue for the universe as the ultimate brute fact, and you argue for an uncaused creator, the agnostic reminds us that any claim about the ultimate uncaused origin, be it natural or supernatural, might be making agnostic claim about something fundamentally unknowable to human reason. This doesn't invalidate the intellectual journey, of course, but it certainly tempers any claim to absolute certainty, urging us toward a more nuanced appreciation of the mystery that lies at the heart of existence.
So, to reiterate my position, the powerful cumulative weight of the Kalam cosmological argument, with its logical deduction of a beginning for the universe, and the fine-tuning argument showcasing the exquisite, almost unbelievable precision of our cosmos, strongly suggests that the intricate beginning and delicate structure of the universe point towards a transcendent, intelligent creator. While I absolutely acknowledge the limits of human understanding on such ultimate questions, as the agnostic perspective rightly highlights, the rational interpretation of the evidence seems to lead compellingly in this direction. The necessity of a non-contingent cause for a contingent universe, combined with the extreme unlikelihood of its life-permitting parameters arising by chance alone, well, it remains a very strong case for design in my view.
And I maintain that the strength of the naturalistic worldview lies in its ability to explain phenomena without recourse to supernatural entities, positing the universe as the ultimate fact and considering the multiverse hypothesis as a more parsimonious, albeit speculative, alternative for the fine-tuning, offers a robust framework for ongoing scientific inquiry. It consistently seeks explanations within the natural order. However, I fully acknowledge the agnostic's compelling case about the fundamentally untestable nature of any ultimate origin claim, whether that claim involves a creator or an infinite ensemble of universes. This certainly cautions against absolute certainty on either side. The universe may simply be, without any further explanation, accessible to us.
This intellectual exchange, I think, while leaving ultimate questions very much open, profoundly illuminates the philosophical depth surrounding the universe's origin and structure. We've pushed against the boundaries of what can be known, what can perhaps be inferred, and what might remain forever mysterious.
Indeed. Considering these distinct perspectives, the demand for a cause, the appeal to statistical inevitability, and the essential humility of unknowability, it only deepens our understanding of the ongoing exploration within the material. The journey of inquiry into these fundamental questions of cosmology is far from over, and there is always more to explore.